Welcome to San Joaquin Spotlight, a public affairs program featuring conversations about life in the central San Joaquin Valley. This program is brought to you in partnership between KFSR 90.7 FM and CMAC Fresno. I'm your host, Sevag Tateosian. Today we're with author Terry Lane. Now, Terry lives in the area of Reedley, so in Fresno County. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Before we get into your book that you have written, tell us a little bit about yourself. So off camera we were talking, and you're a farmer.
I am a farmer. My grandfather was a farmer in Indiana, and my dad was a farmer in Nebraska, and I grew up on that farm in Nebraska that I talk about in the book. And now in California, we moved to California in 1965, and I bought my first farm after I started teaching agriculture at Kingsburg High School in 1974. So I started out as a high school ag teacher and a farmer in 1974, raising peaches, plums, nectarines, and Thompson table grapes.
You know, farming, is it a tough job?
It's a very tough job, and there are no guarantees. It's like being a gambler, because you can lose your whole crop in a year through hailstorms and get wiped out, and I had that happen to me 3 times.
But you have to bounce back somehow. What keeps you motivated to bounce back?
I think it's in the blood. You just love, you love to see things grow. You like to see the fruit, the color of the fruit, the size of the fruit. You want it to taste good. So it's just a love of the land and wanting to produce all those different things. And I think every farmer, no matter what they grow or what they produce, they have that love of the land and growing something.
So the first batch of the year, how are you feeling?
Well, my fruit, I have a very early block of snow angel peaches, and they usually come off around, oh golly, the end of May, and this year they were 22 days early. 22 days, unbelievable. They never really had time, but they ended up sizing pretty good, and they had good flavor, and the price was good. So I can't complain right now. It's so far it's gone very well. And then the second block of peaches that I have are called Angel Kissed, and those were also about 18 days early, and they ended up sizing well, and they had good flavor. And then we got those off, and then my last block are honey-kissed nectarines, and we've done 2 pickings on those, and there's 1 more picking, and they'll be gone. We usually finish those about July the 4th.
Now, we'll talk about the book in a few minutes, but I can't let you go without talking about water. Water is a big thing right now in Fresno County. Talk about how it's impacted you.
Well, I haven't had any ditch water now. This is my 2nd year. And I'm on a consolidated ditch, and it's a wonderful irrigation company. But they haven't had the water for me to pull for irrigating, so I've had to use pump water. And of course, that's, you have to pay for the electricity. It's a 25 horsepower pump, which is a small pump compared to a lot of the big farms. But my power bill runs over $800 a month for that pump.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
That's incredible. So you were born in Nebraska, or are you from Nebraska?
I was born in Lincoln, Nebraska, and my dad was an ag teacher right outside of Nebraska after he got
Following his footsteps, I see.
Followed my dad's footsteps on the farm as well as teaching. And he was a World War II Navy veteran. And I grew up on a farm north of Omaha, 30 miles, right in the Missouri Valley. And one boundary of our farm, 640 acres, was on the Missouri River.
Interesting.
And so it was called bottomland. It was the preferred land. We irrigated, we used siphon tubes. We had an irrigation pump where we would have to water the corn in August. That would be the driest portion of the year to get the corn done. To get it finished, we'd have to irrigate a couple of times. And we grew corn and milo and alfalfa, and we also had winter wheat. We also had about 300 head of Hereford cows, and I talk about that in the book, the cows and the calves, and one of my jobs as a young boy, we had a feedlot. We would keep all the bull calves and castrate them and dehorn them and vaccinate them and feed them out in the feedlot until they would get up to right around 1,000 pounds. And we'd take them to the Omaha stockyards and market them there.
So what got you to decide to write this book?
Well, until I was 34 years, I wasn't saved. I believed in God, but I did not have Jesus. And there's definitely a difference. And I found that out in 1984. My friends told me I needed to be saved, and I didn't know what that meant. I had no idea. I said, well, what do you mean I have to be saved? Well, you have to have Jesus. I said, well, I believe in God. I know there's a God. I know that God created everything that I see, that we can touch and feel and smell and see. I know there's a God. But they said, but you need to have Jesus. And I didn't really know what they meant.
So there's a difference between thinking that there's a God or knowing there's a God and then actually being saved. Talk about that.
Well, there is a difference. And I found that out when I was 34 years old. My wife was a teacher and I was a teacher, and my son was attending the Reedley Mennonite Brethren Church in their preschool program. In fact, it was their very first preschool program called Chapter 1. And it was held in the old parsonage. And I went to pick up my son one day at 4 o'clock, and Mrs. Porter was there, who was the director of the preschool. And on the side of the house there, they had a chain link fence, and I went to pick up my son, and she was there. We had our usual small talk. And Nick came out, my oldest son, Nick, and he was 4 years old. And he said, Daddy, he says, at the church over there across the street, they have Sunday school on Sundays. I said, well, yes, son, I guess they would. It's a church. And he goes, Daddy, he says, in Sunday school, they teach you about Jesus. And I said, well, that's nice. So then he says, Daddy, he says, all my friends go to Sunday school there. And I said, well, that's nice, Nick. And he goes, Daddy, if someone would take me, I could learn about Jesus too and be with my friends. And right there, my heart just broke. I knew that I wasn't doing my duties as a father, taking my son to Sunday school and church. I knew something was wrong. So right at that moment, I knew I had to do something about that.
So your son says this. What's going into your mind? Are you thinking, wait a minute, I'm not doing something right here?
That's right. So I called a friend of mine that went to church there at the Reedley MB Church, and his name was Paul, and he goes, well, just come and be our guest this Sunday. So my wife and I went, we discussed it, and we went and met them at the front of the church. And as soon as we walked inside, some of my farmer friends were there. They shook my hand and gave my wife a hug and just thanked us for coming to church. And we just felt so at home in that church. And I knew that I wanted to go to that church, and my wife felt the same way. Yet we didn't have Jesus. Well, we sat down, and they had two pastors, and they were Henry H. and Henry L., and they shared the message that day. And they talked about Jesus and him crucified on the cross for us, and then being risen from the grave. And I heard that whole story and how we must be born again and come to Christ, that it was through Jesus that was the only way to God. So they went over that whole story in church, and I had never heard a message like that, ever. And I knew that I needed Jesus.
How did the title come up? Many are called, but a few are chosen.
Well, I found out after I was saved that I was 34 years old the night I came to Jesus. And that's quite a scary story in itself in the book, because the night I was saved, I actually saw the devil. And I was one of those guys that I played high school football, I played college football, and I was one of these guys that was rough and tough and hard to bluff, and I was fearful of no man. Yet that night, I definitely had fear when I saw that creature, when I saw the beast.
What did he look like?
Well, I remember it well. It was in October, and it was a cold, it was a warm October night. It was warm October, yet I woke up at midnight, and I felt this cold in the room. The room was really cold, and something was wrong because I felt the hair on the back of my neck kind of get all tingly, and I got goosebumps, and I felt fear. And I knew somebody was in that room. So I got up out of bed, and the closest light switch, my wife had the lamp on the other side of the bed, but she was gone. She was out of town with the kids on a Bible study. And I went to the bathroom to turn the light on, and when I turned the light on, I looked in the mirror, and here was a beast in the mirror, and it was 3D. This huge arm reached out, and he had black hair on the back of his hand. He had a claw on the end of each finger. His arms were just massive, just
strong,
just big and strong looking. His skin was a light green, and it had a scaly look, like it had scales, but it had black hair on it. His ears were pointed. He had black hair that came down about 4 inches. He had 2 little horns that came out of his head, about 2.5 to 3 inches long. His eyes were saucer-shaped, just huge. And where the whites should have been, they were all red. And then he had a black pupil, and these eyes were huge. And he opened his mouth, and he pointed his hand at me, and he said, "You belong to me. You will stay with me." And I saw his red tongue, and he had fangs in his mouth. And it just literally scared me. It just scared me half to death. And I knew that this was a beast, a demon or something. And I ran back by the bed, and I knelt down by the bed, and I said, "Lord Jesus, save me now from this beast." And I felt the Holy Spirit come into the top of my head and go clear through my body. And then the fear was gone, and I knew that I had Jesus. The beast was gone, and I knew that I was saved at that moment. And from that point on, I started reading my Bible, and in fact, my wife's Bible was on the other side of the bed, so I grabbed that and I started reading, and when I opened the Bible, it opened up to Matthew.
Wow.
And I just started reading at midnight, a little after midnight, and I read all night. And she got home the next morning about 10, and when she got home, I was sitting in the chair in the living room, still reading the Bible, and when she walked in, she knew that I was saved. She knew that I had Jesus.
That's incredible. She
had accepted Christ 2 weeks before in this Bible study group in the Sunday school class she was in, but she hadn't told me. And she and the ladies were all praying for me to come to Christ.
That's an incredible story. But you also, in the book, talk about how you saw angels, or angels were a part of your life. Talk about that.
Well, the first time I had a situation with an angel was when I was about 11 years old. Somewhere around there, 9, 10, or 11. I can't remember the exact date, but we were going to Herman School in Herman, Nebraska. And my older brother said, "Brother, I'm going to take you down to the truck stop, and I'm going to buy you a hamburger and fries and a Pepsi. But we got to be back. We only have 30 minutes, and we don't want to be late because the principal's a World War II veteran Marine, and he doesn't like it if we're late." So we went down there, and my brother bought me a hamburger and fries and a Pepsi or a Coke, whatever it was, and it was only $1 back then. This would have been about 1960 or 61. And so we ate, and we were having a great time because I was with my older brother, and he was 4 years older than I. And then he said, "Brother, we've got to go." So we went out, he paid, and we left. And I darted across the highway, and this was the main highway, and there was a diesel truck coming.
Wow, that has to be scary.
The diesel truck, and I turned, and my brother hollered. He goes, "Brother, look out!" And here's this truck coming, and it was like right there. And all of a sudden, this voice said, "Jump." And something grabbed me and threw me 30 feet up in the air and over to the sidewalk out of the way of that truck. Physically grabbed me and threw me. And I landed on my feet, and the other kids saw the whole thing, and my brother saw it. The truck driver stopped because he thought he'd hit me. He saw me fly up through the air. And he was crying, and he said, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And I said, "I'm okay." And my brother came over across the street, and he said, how did you do that? And I said, brother, I don't know how I did it. Somebody said, jump. And the next thing I know, I landed over here on the sidewalk, but I felt something grab me. And so that was the first time I know an angel saved my life.
And then we were talking off camera about you saving a lady's life. Talk about that.
Well, later on, it was, I think about a year later after I was saved. I wasn't teaching at that time. I was in between teaching jobs, and I was working for a tractor company, selling Massey Ferguson and Kubota tractors. Well, my wife was teaching at Washington School right there close to the church where we went to church, the MB Church. And I went home for lunch because we only lived about 6 blocks from the church. And the farm was out in the country. And so I went home for lunch, and I thought, well, I'll go by the school and see if I can see my sons or see my wife out on the playground, and I'll honk and wave at them, or stop and say hi. When I got to the intersection by the school, a voice said, go to the principal's office. A voice spoke to me, an audible voice.
What did the voice sound like?
It was just a man's voice, and it said, go to the principal's office. So
That's incredible.
I'm by myself, so I'm going, well, okay. So I pulled over to the curb, and I was getting out of the car because her office was right there, just 30 feet away. And as I was opening the door, the voice said, hurry. So I slammed the door, and I ran up there, and I opened the door, and here was a kid in front of the principal's desk, and he had a knife in his right hand, and he said, I'm going to kill you. And the principal's name was Mandy, and she says, Mr. Lane, help me. So I grabbed the kid around his chest with my left arm, and I grabbed his wrist with my right arm that held the knife, and I put him up against the wall, and I squeezed his wrist, and he dropped the knife. And he kept saying, I'm going to kill her. And I said, you're not going to kill anybody. Calm down. And I said, Mandy, call the cops. So she called the cops, and they were there immediately. And they took the kid, and they got my story, and they got her story, and then they left. And she just cried, and she says, Mr. Lane, she goes, where did you come from? So then I told her how that voice had told me to go to her office. I was at the intersection in my car. And then when I wasn't going fast enough, it told me to hurry. And I went and opened the door, and I said, you know the rest of the story. And she just cried, and she said, I had just prayed and asked God to help me. And there you were. She says it was almost instantaneous. And so God answered her prayer instantly by sending me there. He knew that I would listen and I would help her. So he knew I would do what I needed to do.
Why did you write this book?
I wrote this book after I was saved. I was watching a crusade with Jimmy Swaggart one night. He was in Costa Rica. And I watched the altar call where literally thousands of people came and prayed the sinner's prayer. Thousands. And this was going on each night. And I wanted to be a part of a ministry where I could lead people to Christ. And so I prayed right there. And when I prayed, all of a sudden, my wife was in bed, all of a sudden I felt this presence all around me, and the room filled with like this blue light, a fluorescent light. And I was on the floor and I couldn't get up. I just felt this presence. And then I started talking. I started to pray, but these 2 words came out of my mouth: Aved Ishtar, Aved Ishtar, Aved Ishtar. And maybe because you're of Armenian descent, you know what that means, because I had an Armenian tell me what those 2 words meant. Well, anyway, after that, then the blue lights went away, and I could breathe normally, and I knew that I was different for some reason. I knew that something had happened, and those 2 words were just embedded in my brain. And so I started trying to research what that meant, and I was at the coffee shop, and this Armenian farmer told me, well, that means in Armenian language, it means gospel gate. You're to be a gospel gate. Well, I started witnessing to people and telling them about Christ, using my Bible. I would study my Bible, and then God would put me with someone, and I'd lead them to Christ.
What an incredible story.
I'd lead them to Christ. And this happened over and over again. Then 10 people, then 20, and then 35 or 40 at a time at the prison or wherever I was. God would use me to preach the gospel and lead people to Christ. And so that's the mission of this book with all these stories, is for people to realize that God is here today working. He's working through people, and he wants people to have a broken heart for Jesus. He wants people to come to Christ. So this book is an outreach of ministry for people to read it, to read the stories, and to accept Jesus.
How did you get the information in the book? I mean, how did you decide what goes in the book and what doesn't?
Well, there's a chapter in here about some of the things that happened to me. In 2001, I had a stroke 8 days after 9/11. And then after that, I had a heart attack. And then after that, but miraculously, I got better. After that, then I had a lump on my arm right here where this scar is, and I had a local doctor here do surgery, and he removed that. Yet when he cut into my arm, I didn't bleed. The blood came out like foam. So I was diagnosed with a rare form of leukemia, and they told me that there was no cure for it. Well, I went to church, and they prayed for me. My wife prayed for me, and I was put with a doctor up in Reno that was a homeopathic doctor, but she was also had 4 medical degrees. She was very, very smart. So she treated me with her homeopathic medicine, and she was also a born-again Christian. I immediately started to get better, immediately. And so after that, I realized that I had an incurable disease, a form of leukemia, but I was okay. So I knew that I had to start writing these things down, these stories that happened to me. And you asked me about the praying hands. And the praying hands, when I was a young boy back in Nebraska, I had a vision one day driving tractor, mowing hay. And the praying hands, the blue one on top, I saw this vision in the clouds, and I saw these praying hands. And I thought, what in the world? What is this? Well, I went after about 3 or 4 minutes, they were gone, so I continued driving tractor. And when I went to the house, I told my mom what I saw, and she kind of looked at me kind of funny, and it must have just been a cloud. And I said, well, Mom, I know what I saw. Well, 5 days later, when I was to rake the hay, I saw it again. And there wasn't a cloud in the sky, but that time, they were gold. And that's why I have the gold hands on here. So God, at that young age, was trying to tell me, trying to give me some kind of a message that he had chosen me to do his work. And so later on, after I was saved and I started witnessing, I knew, and I had friends tell me that God had chosen me to be a witness. So that's why it's called Many Are Called, but Few Are Chosen, because I felt that God truly did call me to be a witness for him, to be a witness for Jesus.
How can people find more information about this book or purchase the book?
They can buy, the book is available at Barnes & Noble. It's available at Amazon.com. It's actually for sale on eBay. I've seen some of them on eBay. It's for sale at Westbow Press at their bookstore. You can also go to my website, which is www.terrylane.com, and they can order the book on my website. And here locally, I have books for sale that people are buying from me at Starbucks in Reedley. And yeah, it's amazing. The Starbucks employees say, oh, the book guy's out there. He's got books for you if you're looking to buy a book. It's cute, And I'm going to meet with the Barnes & Noble, one of the people at Barnes & Noble, and set up a book signing there. But the book is available. It's selling in Australia. It's selling in Germany, in Belgium. It's selling in Holland and Sweden and Denmark and Great Britain. And it's selling all over the world. It's even selling in India for 117 rupees, whatever that is. Yeah, if you Google the book, Many Are Called, but Few Are Chosen, by Terry Lane, there's hundreds of websites that come up, different companies that have it for sale. And I found that out by accident. I was substitute teaching at school, telling the kids about the book. And one of the girls said, well, Mr. Lane, I just Googled it, and it's page after page after page of bookstores selling your book. Did you know that? I said, well, no, I didn't know that. And she goes, well, how do you get paid for that book? And I said, well, they do a direct deposit into my savings account. And they're $9.95 a book, and so whatever the publisher keeps, then they send me the rest. And she goes, well, have you checked your account? And I said, no, I haven't even looked in it. And I said, I wasn't going to look until the end of June. And she goes, well, you need to look at your account, Mr. Lane. I said, well, I want to know that people are buying the book and coming to Christ. That's the most important thing for me. And so that's kind of how it's come about.
Well, you know, we are out of time this week on the program, but good luck to you. You have an incredible story, and I hope you touch many people's lives with this book.
I just hope they read it and they realize that God is there for them, and I would hope that they would make a decision and come to Christ.
That's all for this edition of San Joaquin Spotlight. Our guest this week has been Terry Lane. He is the author of a book called Many Are Called, but a Few Are Chosen. Mr. Lane is from the Reedley area. He's also a farmer. Thank you to the volunteer crew that made this and every production possible. We couldn't do this show without you. To our audience members listening on 90.7 FM, KFSR Fresno, and to those of you watching this on Comcast 93 or AT&T 99, thank you. Tune in next week for a new edition.
Say love.